5-year-old girl gives away her dinner every night. Billionaire restaurant owner collapses when he finds out why. The security cameras at Thompson's, Manhattan's most prestigious restaurant, captured the same scene every night at 10:45 p.m. A small figure in a worn blue coat, no taller than the kitchen counter, would quietly appear at the back entrance. 5-year-old Emily Parker, with golden pigtails and eyes too old for her age, would wait patiently, clutching a recycled paper bag. The staff had grown accustomed to her polite requests for leftover food, but none had ever seen her eat it. When billionaire owner James Thompson finally noticed her presence on the monitors, her simple question, "May I have what you're throwing away?" would shatter his world forever. Before diving into this touching story, please take a moment to share where you're watching from and subscribe to join our community. Your support means everything to us. James Thompson built his restaurant empire from nothing but bitterness and determination. Born into a lower middle-class family in Detroit, he spent his childhood watching his father work 3 jobs while barely making ends meet. The constant struggle left a deep mark on young James, who vowed never to experience poverty again. By age 16, he was already working in restaurant kitchens, learning the business from the ground up while harboring an increasing disdain for those who couldn't pull themselves up by their bootstraps. His first restaurant opened in a modest storefront in Brooklyn when he was 28, funded by maxed-out credit cards and a relentless drive to succeed. The venture nearly failed twice in its first year, but James's brutal work ethic and unwavering attention to detail eventually caught the attention of food critics. By year 3, reservations were booked 6 months in advance. Success bred success, and soon James was opening locations across Manhattan, each more opulent than the last. 20 years later, at 48, James Thompson had become a household name in the restaurant industry. His flagship restaurant, Thompson's, occupied prime real estate in Manhattan, its Art Deco facade and crystal chandeliers symbolizing everything he had achieved. The restaurant's waiting list was legendary, and its clientele included celebrities, politicians, and business titans. Each night, wealthy patrons would spend thousands on meticulously crafted dishes, while James watched from his private office, satisfaction evident in his steel-gray eyes. But success had hardened him. James had developed a reputation for being ruthlessly efficient, firing staff members for the slightest infractions and publicly berating vendors who failed to meet his exacting standards. His views on poverty had calcified into a rigid ideology: those who worked hard enough would succeed, those who didn't were simply lazy. He frequently gave interviews expressing these views, earning both praise from conservative business publications and criticism from social justice advocates. The recent food waste scandal had only reinforced his defensive posture. When local news outlets reported that Thompson's restaurants were throwing away hundreds of pounds of perfectly good food each week, James responded with characteristic disdain. "We maintain the highest standards," he told reporters. "What others call waste, we call quality control." He dismissed suggestions to donate the excess food, citing liability concerns and logistical complications. In board meetings, James often boasted about his merit-based hiring practices, though his executive team remained suspiciously homogeneous. He prided himself on never giving handouts, requiring even entry-level employees to have prestigious culinary school degrees. His annual charity gala was more about networking than actual charitable giving, though he made sure to document every tax-deductible donation. The empire he had built now included 15 high-end restaurants, a culinary academy, and a line of premium kitchen products. Forbes estimated his net worth at $2.3 billion, a figure that James felt still undervalued his achievements. His penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, his cars were all limited editions, and his art collection was the envy of museums. He had everything he had ever wanted, yet something intangible seemed to be missing. Perhaps that's why the little girl on the security monitor caught his attention. In all his years of surveillance footage reviews, looking for employee theft or service infractions, he had never focused on the back alley activity after closing time. The child's presence was an anomaly in his perfectly controlled world, a reminder of something he had long ago chosen to forget. But instead of immediately ordering security to remove her, as he would have done in the past, James found himself watching the grainy footage night after night, something stirring in his carefully guarded heart that he couldn't quite identify. What James didn't know yet was that this small disturbance in his meticulously ordered world would soon force him to confront everything he thought he knew about success, worthiness, and the true cost of turning a blind eye to human suffering. His entire empire was about to be shaken by a 5-year-old girl whose simple presence would crack the foundation of his carefully constructed worldview. Emily Parker lived in a world that existed in the shadows of Manhattan's glittering skyscrapers. Her home was a small, worn apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days, just 15 blocks from Thompson's restaurant. At 5 years old, she possessed the kind of quiet dignity that comes from growing up too fast, her small shoulders carrying burdens no child should bear. 2 years ago, Emily's life had been different. Her mother, Sarah Parker, had been the rising star chef at Thompson's, known for her innovative fusion cuisine and warm personality. Their apartment had been filled with the aroma of experimental dishes and the sound of Sarah's infectious laughter. Emily would sit on the kitchen counter, watching her mother create culinary masterpieces while sharing stories about the magic of cooking. Food isn't just sustenance, sweetheart Sarah would say, it's how we show love to the world. Those memories now existed only in Emily's treasured notebook, where she carefully preserved her mother's recipes and the little notes Sarah used to leave in her lunchbox. The accident that took Sarah's life had happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, when her car mysteriously lost control on her way home from work. The official report cited brake failure, but Emily had overheard adult conversations that hinted at something more sinister. Now, Emily's days revolved around caring for her grandmother, Grace, whose health had deteriorated rapidly after Sarah's death. Grace's rheumatoid arthritis had progressed aggressively, making even simple tasks like holding a spoon painful. The medical bills had depleted their savings, forcing them to sell most of their possessions. Yet Grace never complained, using what little strength she had to help Emily with her homework and maintain their dignity. Emily had adapted to their new reality with remarkable resilience. She woke up early each morning to help Grace with her medication, then walked herself to school, carrying a backpack often filled with outdated textbooks. Her teachers noticed how she saved half of her free lunch, carefully wrapping it in napkins to take home. They offered help, but Emily would politely decline, having inherited her grandmother's fierce pride. After school, Emily would spend hours at the public library, doing homework and reading about cooking, trying to keep her mother's passion alive. The librarians had grown fond of the serious little girl who would pore over culinary magazines, meticulously copying recipes into her worn notebook. They pretended not to notice when she fell asleep among the books, exhausted from her adult responsibilities. The nightly visits to Thompson's restaurant had begun 3 months ago, when Emily discovered that the establishment threw away perfectly good food. She remembered how her mother used to cook extra meals for the homeless shelter on weekends, teaching Emily that everyone deserved to eat with dignity. The first time she asked for leftover food, her heart had pounded so hard she thought it would burst, but her mother's voice in her head gave her courage. Most of the staff initially ignored her, some even shooed her away, but Emily persisted with unwavering politeness. "May I please have what you're throwing away?" she would ask each night, standing straight and tall despite her threadbare coat. She never begged, never cried, maintaining the grace her mother had taught her. Only Robert Wilson, the elderly line cook, showed her kindness, sometimes secretly packaging fresh food instead of leftovers. What no one at Thompson's knew was that Emily had created a small network of her own. The food she collected wasn't for herself, it went to Mr. Johnson, the veteran who lived in his car behind the library, to Ms. Rodriguez and her 3 children, who had fled an abusive home, to the elderly couple who had lost their pension to a scam. She distributed the food with the same care her mother had shown in plating 5-star meals, ensuring everyone felt respected. Each night, After her food delivery route, Emily would return to their apartment, climbing the creaky stairs to find Grace waiting up despite her pain. They would share a simple dinner, often just rice and whatever vegetables were on sale, but Grace made sure Emily ate first. As they ate, they would look at Sarah's photo on the wall, sharing memories and dreams, their love for each other a shield against the hardships they faced. Emily never complained about their situation, but sometimes, late at night, she would clutch her mother's old chef's apron and allow herself to cry quietly, missing the warmth of Sarah's hugs and the security of their former life. Yet by morning, her determined smile would return, ready to face another day with the quiet strength that was becoming her hallmark. Robert Wilson stood at his station in Thompson's kitchen, his 65 years etched in the lines around his eyes, but his hands still steady as he chopped vegetables with precision. After 4 decades in professional kitchens, he had seen every kind of success and failure the culinary world could offer, but nothing had affected him quite like the arrival of Emily Parker at the restaurant's back door. As the longest-serving employee at Thompson's, Robert held a position of quiet influence. The younger staff respected his expertise, coming to him for advice both professional and personal. He had trained countless chefs, including Sarah Parker, whose death still haunted him. Every time he saw Emily, he saw Sarah's same determined spirit and kind heart. He knew more about Sarah's last days than he had ever revealed, carrying that burden like a stone in his chest. Grace Parker, Emily's grandmother, maintained a dignity that transcended her circumstances. Her arthritis-twisted hands had once signed investment checks that helped launch Thompson's first restaurant, though few knew this history. She had been among the first to recognize James Thompson's potential, investing a significant portion of her savings in his vision. The subsequent legal maneuvers that had stripped her of her shares remained a carefully buried secret, one that had forced her to silently watch Thompson's rise to fame from the sidelines. Despite her constant pain and dwindling resources, Grace focused on providing Emily with stability and love. She spent her days in their small apartment, carefully managing their meager resources and maintaining detailed records of every penny spent and saved. The walls of their home were covered with Emily's drawings and Sarah's awards, preserving memories of happier times. Each night, she waited anxiously for Emily's return, her heart torn between pride in her granddaughter's compassion and fear for her safety. Michael Stewart, Thompson's head chef, presented a polished image to the world. His televised cooking segments and cookbook deals had made him a minor celebrity, but beneath the charismatic exterior lay a web of corruption. He had worked his way up through manipulation and intimidation, building a network of loyal subordinates who helped him maintain his profitable side operations. Sarah's accidental discovery of his illegal activities had forced his hand, leading to decisions that now threatened to unravel everything. The restaurant staff existed in distinct hierarchies, from the immigrant dishwashers who worked tirelessly in the basement to the sommelier who curated the million-dollar wine cellar. Many had witnessed Emily's nightly appearances, their reactions ranging from irritation to pity to quiet support. Some, like Jane Anderson, the pastry chef, would occasionally accidentally leave fresh bread near the back door. Others, following Michael's orders, would deliberately discard food where Emily couldn't reach it. The regular customers at Thompson's represented New York's elite, their conversations about premium wines and market trends floating above tables that cost more than many people's monthly rent. Yet among them were those who noticed the small figure in the alley, their consciences pricked by the contrast between their excess and her need. A few had tried to help, only to be rebuffed by management, who insisted they had the situation under control. The homeless community that Emily served had become her extended family. They protected her during her nightly rounds, keeping watch and sharing information about dangerous areas to avoid. Mr. Johnson, the veteran, would often walk a discreet distance behind her, ensuring she reached home safely. Ms. Rodriguez helped by distributing food to others when Emily had school assignments, and the elderly couple saved their newspapers for Grace to read. These interconnected lives orbited around Thompson's restaurant, each person carrying their own secrets and struggles. Robert Wilson watched it all from his kitchen station, noting the subtle power plays and alliances, recognizing the signs of approaching conflict. He had witnessed Sarah's growing concern in the weeks before her death, had seen the threatening notes she received, had noticed the suspicious modifications to her car. The weight of this knowledge pressed heavily on Robert as he watched Emily navigate her nightly missions. He knew the same forces that had silenced Sarah were still in place, growing more nervous as Emily's presence drew unwanted attention to the restaurant's back alley activities. Yet he also recognized that the time for silence was ending, that the truth could not remain buried forever, especially now that James Thompson had begun to take notice of the small girl in the security footage. Each character's story was a thread in a complex tapestry of power, corruption, and redemption, all centered around a 5-year-old girl whose simple acts of kindness were about to expose long-buried secrets and force long-overdue reckonings. The discovery began with a routine security audit. James Thompson sat in his office late one evening, reviewing footage as part of his monthly protocol. The high-definition screens cast a blue glow across his mahogany desk as he fast-forwarded through hours of kitchen activity. His attention was caught by a recurring pattern every night at precisely 10:45 p.m. The back door would open, and a small figure would appear. Initially, James dismissed it as a busboy taking out trash, but something about the regularity made him pause. He rewound the footage, slowed it down, and leaned forward. The figure was far too small to be an employee. A child, barely visible above the metal garbage bins, would stand patiently by the door, clutching what appeared to be a recycled paper bag. Her posture was striking straight-backed, dignified, despite her worn clothing. The kitchen staff's reactions varied dramatically across the footage. Some ignored her completely, others made shooing motions, while a few, particularly Robert Wilson, seemed to deliberately place food containers within her reach. James watched weeks of footage, his expression darkening as he realized this had been happening under his nose for months. He immediately called his head of security, demanding explanations. The guard's uncomfortable shuffle and vague responses suggested everyone knew about the girl, except him. "She's never caused any trouble," Mr. Thompson, the guard, offered weakly. "Just takes what we're throwing out anyway," James dismissed him with a wave, but couldn't dismiss the nagging feeling that he was missing something significant. The next evening, James broke his usual routine of leaving at 8 and stayed late, positioning himself near a window overlooking the back alley. At precisely 10:45 p.m., Emily appeared. From his vantage point, he could observe her unnoticed. Her methodical approach to collecting discarded food struck him as unusually professional for a child. She had clearly developed a system. What caught his attention most was her interaction with his staff. Despite repeated rejections, she maintained impeccable manners. "Thank you for checking," she would say when told there was nothing available. "But I'll try again tomorrow." Her resilience was both admirable and disturbing. James found himself wondering about her parents, her home life, the circumstances that would drive a child to such measures. The situation became more complex when James discovered that some of his best customers had noticed Emily. During a high-profile dinner service, he overheard a wealthy regular discussing the little girl in the alley with her companions. The conversation quickly turned to criticism of the restaurant's waste policies and questions about their charitable giving. James felt his carefully cultivated image beginning to crack. Further investigation revealed divided opinions among his staff. The younger employees, particularly those from privileged backgrounds, saw Emily as a nuisance, a reminder of the poverty they preferred to ignore. But the veteran staff members, especially those who had worked with Sarah Parker, treated Emily with a deference that seemed out of proportion for a child collecting scraps. Robert Wilson's behavior particularly intrigued James. The elderly chef, known for his strict adherence to kitchen protocol, appeared to be deliberately setting aside untouched food portions. Through the security footage, James watched Robert carefully packaging fresh bread, unserved side dishes, and even occasionally a whole dessert. This clear violation of policy from his most rule-abiding employee suggested deeper currents at work. Late one night, reviewing more footage, James noticed something that made him pause. Emily had slipped on the wet pavement, sending her collected food scattering across the alley. Instead of gathering what she could and running, she methodically cleaned every spilled morsel, even wiping the ground with her sleeve. This wasn't the behavior of someone taking advantage, this was someone who understood the value of what they were handling. The discovery of Emily's nightly routine had created an unexpected crack in James's carefully constructed worldview. Here was poverty he couldn't ignore, dignity he couldn't dismiss, and complexity he couldn't reduce to simple laziness or lack of effort. The situation demanded action, but for the first time in years, James Thompson wasn't sure what that action should be. As he sat in his darkened office, watching the small figure make her way down the alley one more time, James felt an unfamiliar sensation: doubt. His empire was built on the belief that success came to those who earned it, that poverty was a choice, that the world was simple and fair. But there was nothing simple or fair about a 5-year-old organizing her life around collecting discarded food, and that realization would prove to be just the beginning of his unraveling certainties. The truth about Emily's mission began to emerge on a particularly cold Tuesday evening. James had finally decided to follow her, not out of malice but driven by an inexplicable need to understand. Keeping a discreet distance, he watched as she navigated the back alleys of Manhattan with surprising confidence, her small figure moving purposefully through the gathering darkness. What he witnessed shattered his preconceptions. Emily's first stop was behind the public library, where an elderly veteran lived in his car. She approached him with the same politeness she showed at the restaurant, carefully dividing the food into portions. "Mr. Johnson, I found some of that soup you liked," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet alley. The man's response, a gentle pat on her head and a gruff "you're just like your mother," kid, caught James's attention. The next stop was a rundown apartment building. Here, Emily met a young mother with 3 children, all clearly living in poverty, but maintaining a sense of dignity. The woman, who James later learned was Ms. Rodriguez, tried to refuse the food at first, but Emily's insistence was touching. "Mom always said sharing food is sharing love," she explained, arranging the containers on their worn table with the precision of a seasoned chef. As James continued to observe, he saw Emily make several more stops. Each recipient had a story. Each interaction was filled with a humanity that made his throat tight. An elderly couple who had lost everything to medical bills. A former teacher now homeless due to mental illness. A young family living in their car. Emily treated each person with the same respect she would show to his highest-paying customers. The connection to Sarah Parker's charitable work became clear as James pieced together conversations he overheard. Sarah had run an unofficial food distribution network during her time as head chef, using her position to help those in need. Many of Emily's current recipients spoke of Sarah with reverence, describing how she would cook special meals for them on holidays and help their children with homework. Robert Wilson's role in the operation also became apparent. The elderly chef had been Sarah's mentor and had helped her establish the charitable network. Now he was quietly continuing her legacy through Emily, ensuring that quality food made its way to those who needed it most. His careful packaging and strategic placement of containers wasn't just kindness, it was a deliberate continuation of Sarah's mission. The scope of the operation was far larger than James had imagined. Emily had essentially created a small-scale food distribution network, matching different types of food to specific needs. She knew which families had children with allergies, who needed soft foods due to dental issues, who could handle reheating meals, and who needed ready-to-eat items. Her organizational skills would have impressed his best managers. But it was the impact of her work that truly stunned James. He watched as elderly recipients regained their dignity through these shared meals, as children went to bed with full stomachs, as families gathered around tables with food that would otherwise have been wasted. The contrast between the thousands of dollars his customers spent on single meals and the joy these rescued leftovers brought was stark and uncomfortable. The revelation of Emily's true purpose forced James to confront uncomfortable truths about his own policies. His strict rules about disposing of unused food, which he had always justified as quality control, suddenly seemed wasteful and cruel. But the carefully maintained distance between his prestigious restaurant and the struggling communities around it felt artificial and wrong. More disturbing was the realization that Sarah Parker's charitable work might have been connected to her death. James began noticing patterns in the conversations around him: nervous glances when her name was mentioned, sudden silences when certain topics came up. The network she had built, which Emily now maintained, seemed to have threatened something or someone. As James walked back to his restaurant that night, his worldview had shifted fundamentally. The waste he had so casually dismissed was sustaining an entire community. The child he had initially seen as a nuisance was carrying out a mission of mercy with more grace and dignity than many of his wealthy patrons. And somewhere in this story lay the seeds of a tragedy he was only beginning to understand. But the surface had barely been scratched. Behind Emily's nightly food deliveries lay deeper secrets, darker truths, and a conspiracy that would soon threaten not just James's restaurant empire, but the lives of everyone involved in this hidden network of compassion and survival. The first signs of conflict emerged when James's discovery became known within the restaurant. Michael Stewart, the head chef, immediately implemented stricter waste disposal procedures, citing health and safety concerns. Security cameras were repositioned, locks were changed, and staff were explicitly forbidden from leaving food accessible after closing. The message was clear: Emily's operation was to be shut down. The staff divided into factions almost immediately. The younger line cooks and servers, eager to curry favor with management, began ostentatiously destroying leftover food, making sure Emily could see them pouring bleach over discarded meals. Others, particularly those who remembered Sarah Parker, found subtle ways to resist. Containers would mysteriously appear in different locations. Wrapped portions would be accidentally left on outside tables. Robert Wilson faced the most direct pressure. Michael called him into the office for a performance review, despite his decades of exemplary service. The message was thinly veiled: stop helping the girl or face termination. Robert responded with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen too much to be intimidated. "Some things are worth more than a paycheck, Mr. Stewart," he said, returning to his station while Michael's face darkened with barely contained rage. The situation escalated when local media caught wind of the story. A freelance photographer had captured images of Emily making her rounds, contrasting her small figure with the restaurant's opulent facade. The photos went viral on social media, accompanied by headlines questioning why a five-star restaurant was allowing a child to collect scraps. James found himself fielding calls from reporters, his carefully crafted public image threatening to unravel. Emily, meanwhile, continued her nightly visits with unwavering determination. When faced with locked dumpsters, she would wait patiently by the door, her presence a silent reminder of the community that depended on her. Some nights she left empty-handed, but she always returned, her resilience a rebuke to those trying to stop her. The sight of her standing in the rain, refusing to give up, began to affect even the most hardened staff members. Public attention brought unexpected complications. Well-meaning patrons tried to invite Emily inside for proper meals, forcing James to explicitly forbid staff from allowing her into the restaurant. Social workers began appearing, asking questions about child labor and exploitation. Local business owners, pressured by their own customers, started implementing similar restrictions on food disposal, cutting off other sources in Emily's network. The conflict reached a new level when anonymous complaints began flooding the health department. Allegations of food safety violations and improper disposal practices triggered a series of surprise inspections. Though nothing significant was found, the increased scrutiny created a tense atmosphere in the kitchen. Staff members began watching each other suspiciously, wondering who was reporting to whom. Grace Parker, watching from their small apartment, recognized the patterns emerging. She had seen similar tactics used years ago when she lost her investment in the restaurant. But her attempts to warn Emily were met with the simple wisdom of a child mom always said helping others is right, even when its hard grace could only hold her granddaughter tighter, feeling the storm gathering around them. The homeless community that depended on Emily's deliveries began to suffer. Mr. Johnson, the veteran, lost significant weight. MS. Rodriguez's children started missing school, too hungry to concentrate. The elderly couple stopped attending their church, ashamed of their increasing desperation. Each story added to the weight of responsibility on Emily's small shoulders, even as her task grew more difficult. James found himself caught in an increasingly complex moral dilemma. His business instincts told him to shut down Emily's operation completely. The liability risks alone were significant. Yet every time he saw her on the security monitors, something stopped him from giving the final order. The question of why a child had to perform this service at all began to haunt him, along with growing suspicions about Sarah Parker's death. The situation reached a critical point when Michael Stewart implemented his most aggressive measure yet. He ordered all garbage to be stored in a locked indoor facility until collection, effectively cutting off any access to discarded food. The night this policy took effect, Emily stood in her usual spot for hours, her small face pressed against the glass door, watching as staff members avoided meeting her eyes. The image would later haunt many of those present, becoming a symbol of the human cost of corporate policies. As tension mounted within the restaurant, subtle signs suggested larger forces at work. Mysterious phone calls, hushed conversations in the kitchen, and the occasional appearance of expensive cars in the back alley hinted at something more sinister than simple food waste policies. The initial conflict over a child's charitable mission was about to expose a web of corruption, deceit, and tragedy that would shake the foundation of James Thompson's empire. As this touching story of compassion and redemption unfolds, your like means more than just a click. It helps share Emily's powerful message with others who need to hear it. James Thompson's investigation into Emily Parker's story took an unexpected turn when a weathered notebook was discovered behind a loose panel in the restaurant's kitchen. Robert Wilson had noticed Emily staring at that spot repeatedly, and during a quiet moment he investigated and found Sarah Parker's personal journal, carefully wrapped in plastic and hidden away. The notebook's contents were explosive. Detailed records of inventory discrepancies, suspicious deliveries at odd hours, and conversations overheard in the kitchen painted a disturbing picture. Sarah's neat handwriting documented a pattern of irregularities that went far beyond simple food waste. There were coded references to large cash transactions, unauthorized use of delivery vehicles, and meetings with unnamed suppliers that occurred long after normal business hours. More disturbing was Sarah's personal notes about being followed. Third time this week, Black's UV tinted Windows 1 entry read, MS, watching my station more closely. Claims it's about quality control, but something feels wrong. The entries became increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to her death. The final entry, dated just 2 days before her accident, was particularly chilling. Found proof. Need to tell JT. Everything makes sense now. Meeting tomorrow. James brought in a private investigator, careful to keep the investigation quiet. The PI's preliminary findings about Sarah's accident raised red flags. The brake lines in her car showed signs of tampering, but the police investigation had been surprisingly cursory. The responding officer's report contained obvious inconsistencies, and key witness statements were missing from the file. Robert Wilson's behavior became more erratic as the investigation progressed. The elderly chef would start at sudden noises, check his phone constantly, and sometimes stand staring into space, wooden spoon frozen mid-stir. When James tried to question him about Sarah, Robert would change the subject or suddenly remember urgent tasks in the freezer. Yet his protective attitude toward Emily intensified, suggesting he knew more than he was willing to say. The restaurant's financial records from the period of Sarah's employment revealed troubling patterns. Large discrepancies in food costs, unexplained expenses, and irregular payments to shell companies all pointed to a sophisticated operation running parallel to the legitimate business. Most concerning were the connections to companies known to be fronts for organized crime, carefully hidden in layers of paperwork. Security footage from the nights before Sarah's death showed unusual activity: multiple deliveries after midnight, unauthorized access to the wine cellar, and lengthy meetings in Michael Stewart's office that didn't appear in any official logs. In one particularly telling clip, Sarah could be seen photographing documents on Stewart's desk when she thought she was alone, her hands shaking as she worked. James discovered that his own signature had been forged on numerous documents during this period. Purchase orders for non-existent supplies, approvals for phantom maintenance work, and authorizations for staff that had never existed created a paper trail of fraud that had somehow escaped his notice. The realization that this had happened under his watch, while he focused on expansion and publicity, filled him with both rage and shame. Anonymous notes began appearing on James's desk, warning him to drop the investigation. Some stones are better left unturned, one read. Another was more direct: think about your legacy. The threats only strengthened his resolve, but they also confirmed his growing suspicion that Sarah's death was anything but accidental. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. A young dishwasher working late one night had captured video on his phone of an argument between Sarah and Michael Stewart. The footage showed Stewart threatening Sarah, his finger jabbing at her chest as he spoke about loyalty. And keeping quiet, Sarah's response was inaudible, but her defiant stance spoke volumes. The video was dated the night before her death. As James pieced together these fragments, a larger picture began to emerge. His prestigious restaurant had been used as a front for something far darker. Sarah Parker had discovered the truth and paid the ultimate price for her integrity. Now her daughter was unknowingly drawing attention to the very operation that had killed her mother, putting herself in the same danger. The weight of these revelations pressed heavily on James. Every night, watching Emily make her rounds on the security monitors, he wondered how many others had been silenced, how many lives had been destroyed while he chased Michelin stars and magazine covers. The investigation had started with a child collecting leftover food, but it was leading him into the heart of a conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything he had built, and perhaps that was exactly what needed to happen. The breakthrough in understanding Grace Parker's connection to Thompson's came through a chance encounter with an old photograph. While reviewing historical documents for the investigation, James discovered a faded picture from his restaurant's opening night. There, standing beside him with a proud smile, was a younger Grace Parker, her hand resting on an oversized check that had funded the venture. The discovery sent James diving into the restaurant's incorporation papers. Hidden beneath layers of legal jargon and amended documents lay the truth: Grace Parker had been more than just an investor. She had been the primary financial backbone of his initial success. Her investment, representing her life savings and a second mortgage on her home, had provided the crucial capital that transformed his dream from a small Brooklyn eatery into the beginning of an empire. What followed was a carefully orchestrated series of legal maneuvers that had gradually diluted Grace's ownership. Complex contractual clauses, triggered during moments of expansion, had systematically reduced her stake. Each time the paperwork had been presented during crises or urgent opportunities, requiring immediate signatures with promises of future compensation that never materialized. The timing of these events aligned suspiciously with Sarah Parker's hiring as head chef. James had always assumed Sarah's stellar credentials had earned her the position, but now he saw a different pattern. She had been brought in during a period of rapid expansion, her presence perhaps intended to placate Grace as her ownership was being systematically dismantled. Robert Wilson, when carefully questioned, revealed more of the story. Grace had been battling early symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis. Even then, her condition used as leverage to pressure her into signing away her rights. They told her she was a liability, Robert explained, his voice heavy with old anger. said no one would invest in a restaurant partially owned by someone who couldn't even hold a spoon steadily. Bank records from that period showed a pattern of suspicious transfers. Large sums would move through a series of accounts before disappearing into offshore holdings. Grace's signature appeared on documents she couldn't possibly have signed, as hospital records showed her undergoing treatment on those dates. The fraud was elaborate and professional, suggesting involvement from someone with significant financial expertise. Sarah's personal notes, discovered in her old locker, revealed she had been investigating these transactions. Her culinary training had included business courses, and she had noticed discrepancies in the restaurant's books. Pages of careful calculations and highlighted bank statements showed her methodically building a case, unaware that her investigation would ultimately cost her life. The most heartbreaking discovery was a letter Grace had written to James but never sent. Found among Sarah's belongings, it detailed her pride in helping launch the restaurant, her hurt at being pushed out, and her hope that the truth would eventually come to light. "I never wanted wealth," she wrote, "just to be part of something that brought joy to people through food, as my family has done for generations." James's own memories of that period began to shift. Meetings he'd dismissed as routine now took on sinister undertones. Legal advisors he'd trusted appeared more predatory in retrospect. Even his rapid rise to success, which he'd attributed solely to his hard work, was revealed to have been built partly on the systematic destruction of Grace Parker's dreams. The full scope of the betrayal became clear when James discovered records of Grace's attempts to seek legal help. Each time she had been blocked by lawyers who, unknown to her, were already on Michael Stewart's payroll. Her increasing isolation and financial distress had been carefully engineered, forcing her to sell her remaining shares at a fraction of their value to cover mounting medical bills. These revelations cast Emily's current situation in an even more tragic light. The child collecting scraps from the back door of Thompson's was the granddaughter of the woman who had made the restaurant possible in the first place. The empire that now sought to shut down her charitable efforts had been built with her family's sacrificed dreams. The final piece fell into place when James uncovered documents showing that the same shell companies involved in the current suspicious activities had been used to purchase Grace's shares years ago. The corruption that had claimed Sarah's life had its roots in the original betrayal of Grace Parker, a web of deceit that had spanned years and destroyed multiple lives. As James sat in his office, surrounded by the evidence of years of systematic fraud and betrayal, he realized that Emily's appearance at his back door wasn't just a random occurrence, it was the past coming back to demand justice. The child's quiet dignity, her determination to help others despite her own circumstances, stood as a powerful rebuke to the greed and manipulation that had built his success. The situation reached a critical point when Grace Parker collapsed one evening while waiting for Emily's return. The neighbors found her unconscious, her medication untouched, because she couldn't afford the refills. At the hospital, doctors delivered grim news: without immediate treatment, her condition would continue to deteriorate rapidly. The cost of the recommended treatment plan was astronomical, far beyond what their meager savings could cover. Emily's school performance began showing the strain of her double life. Her teacher noticed she was falling asleep in class, homework assignments were incomplete, and her once perfect attendance record was marred by unexplained absences. Despite her best efforts to maintain her mother's high academic standards, the weight of her responsibilities was becoming too heavy for her small shoulders. The media attention surrounding Thompson's restaurant took an unexpected turn when a prominent food critic published a scathing article. Without naming Emily directly, the piece detailed the contrast between the restaurant's luxurious excess and its treatment of a young charity worker who distributed its waste to the needy. Social media exploded with speculation and criticism, drawing unwanted attention to both the restaurant and Emily's activities. Local authorities began taking a closer interest in the situation. Child Protective Services made inquiries about Emily's late-night activities, questioning whether she was being properly supervised. The threat of separation loomed over the small family, adding another layer of stress to Grace's already fragile health. The social worker's reports, while sympathetic, noted concerns about a 5-year-old's involvement in food distribution after dark. The homeless community that depended on Emily's deliveries faced increasing pressure from city officials. New ordinances restricted where people could gather, and increased police patrols made it harder for Emily to reach her regular recipients. Mr. Johnson was forced to move his car multiple times, while Ms. Rodriguez and her children faced eviction from their temporary housing. Inside Thompson's, tensions reached a breaking point. Robert Wilson received an anonymous note in his locker containing photos of his grandchildren at their school, along with a clear message to stay quiet. Other staff members who had helped Emily reported similar intimidation tactics. The kitchen atmosphere became poisonous, filled with suspicion and fear. James Thompson's own position became increasingly precarious. His board of directors, concerned about the negative publicity, demanded immediate action to resolve the situation. Major investors threatened to pull out if the controversy continued, while celebrity clients began canceling their reservations. The empire he had built was showing cracks at its foundation. Grace's medical situation deteriorated further, forcing Emily to miss several nights of her food distribution rounds. The impact on their beneficiaries was immediate and heartbreaking. Reports reached Emily of children going to bed hungry, elderly recipients skipping meals to make food last longer, and families returning to overcrowded shelters. Each story added to her determination to continue, despite the mounting obstacles. The investigation into Sarah's death attracted dangerous attention. James's private investigator reported being followed, his office was broken into, and key evidence disappeared from his files. More worrying were the subtle threats directed at Emily, a car following her route home, strange men photographing her at school, suspicious maintenance work being conducted near Grace's apartment. Michael Stewart's behavior became increasingly erratic as the pressure mounted. Kitchen staff reported hearing heated phone conversations in multiple languages, late-night meetings with suspicious characters, and the shredding of documents after hours. His trademark perfectionism gave way to outbursts of temper, particularly when Emily's name was mentioned. The financial stakes became clear when James's forensic accountants uncovered the true scope of the illegal operations. Millions of dollars had been laundered through the restaurant's accounts, connected to international criminal enterprises. The same organizations appeared linked to both Sarah's death and the original theft of Grace's investment. Grace's health crisis forced Emily to make impossible choices. Each hour spent delivering food was an hour away from her grandmother's bedside. Each meal given to others was money not saved for Grace's medication. Yet she persisted, understanding somehow that her mother's mission was connected to forces larger than their immediate needs. As winter approached, bringing bitter cold to the city streets, the situation became desperate on all fronts. Grace required hospitalization but couldn't afford it. Emily's school threatened to contact authorities about her situation. The homeless community faced the deadly combination of hunger and freezing temperatures. And circling it all, the powerful forces that had killed Sarah Parker prepared to protect their interests once again. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either expose years of corruption and bring justice to the Parker family, or silence their story forever. For James Thompson, the choice between preserving his empire and protecting a 5-year-old girl would define not just his legacy, but his humanity. The unraveling of the conspiracy began with a series of encrypted emails found in Michael Stewart's private computer after a suspicious system crash. The restaurant's specialist, while attempting to recover lost data, stumbled upon a hidden folder containing years of correspondence with international suppliers. What initially appeared to be routine communication about specialty ingredients revealed a complex network of money laundering and smuggling operations. James, working late into the night with his private investigators, began mapping the connections. The legitimate restaurant supply chain had been used as cover for moving illegal goods and laundering money. Premium wine shipments concealed more than expensive vintages, and certain specialty ingredients never made it to the kitchen. Sarah Parker had discovered this operation, meticulously documenting discrepancies in inventory and suspicious patterns in deliveries. The corruption extended deep into local law enforcement. Officers who had investigated Sarah's accident were found to have received substantial deposits in offshore accounts. The detective who ruled her death accidental had retired immediately afterward, relocating to a luxury villa in Spain. Traffic camera footage from the night of the accident had been accidentally erased, and key witnesses had suddenly left the country. Robert Wilson finally broke his silence, providing crucial testimony. He revealed how Sarah had confided in him about her discoveries, showing him evidence of the smuggling operation. The night before her death, she had entrusted him with copies of key documents, making him promise to protect Emily if anything happened to her. His years of quiet assistance to Emily weren't just about charity. He was keeping a promise to her mother while gathering evidence to bring down the organization that killed her. The scale of the operation was staggering. Thompson's prestigious reputation and multiple international locations had provided perfect cover for moving illegal goods across borders. Special wine cellars, private dining rooms, and exclusive tasting events had all been used to facilitate criminal transactions. The restaurant's legitimate success had made it easier to hide the millions in illegal profits flowing through its accounts. But Michael Stewart's role emerged as far more sinister than anyone had suspected. Before joining Thompson's, he had worked at restaurants across Europe and Asia, each establishment later linked to organized crime. His culinary expertise and media presence had been carefully crafted to deflect attention from his real role as a coordinator for international criminal enterprises. The connection to Grace Parker's lost investment became clear. Her initial stake in the restaurant had been targeted specifically because the criminals needed a legitimate front for their operations. The legal maneuvers that had stripped her of her shares were orchestrated to ensure complete control over the business. Sarah's hiring had been no coincidence. It was meant to keep Grace quiet through family loyalty. James discovered his own unwitting complicity in the scheme. His focus on expansion and publicity had made him the perfect figurehead. His reputation for demanding perfection and controlling every detail had paradoxically made it easier for others to hide their activities, as no one questioned intensive security measures or unusual operating procedures at a Thompson restaurant. The investigation revealed a pattern of systematic intimidation. Other employees who had noticed irregularities over the years had been silenced through a combination of bribes and threats. Those who couldn't be bought had faced orchestrated personal crises, tax audits, legal troubles, family emergencies until they either quit or fell in line. Current attempts to stop Emily's food distribution took on new meaning. Her presence at the back door each night threatened to expose ongoing illegal activities. The timing of deliveries and movements of goods had to be adjusted to avoid her observation. Her simple act of charity had inadvertently created a security risk for a criminal enterprise worth millions. The most damning evidence came from Sarah's old phone, recovered from police evidence storage. Hidden in encrypted files were photographs and videos documenting meetings between Michael Stewart and known criminal figures. One video, taken the day before her death, showed Stewart discussing how to handle the problem she represented. The footage ended with a clear threat directed at Emily. As the conspiracy unraveled, the danger to Emily increased exponentially. The criminal organization, feeling threatened, began moving to clean up loose ends. Surveillance photos of Emily and Grace appeared in Robert's locker. The brakes on Emily's school bus were tampered with. A gas leak was reported in their apartment building, forcing an evacuation that left them vulnerable. James realized that his investigation had inadvertently placed Emily in the same danger that had claimed her mother's life. The organization was too large and too powerful to be brought down without risking more lives. Yet the evidence was now too substantial to ignore, and too many people knew the truth. The choice between justice and safety became increasingly impossible. The final piece of the puzzle emerged from an unexpected source. The elderly couple Emily helped feed turned out to be former accountants who had been quietly documenting financial irregularities they noticed in discarded restaurant documents Emily had inadvertently brought them. Their detailed analysis provided the paper trail needed to connect all the pieces of the criminal enterprise. The conspiracy had been hidden in plain sight, protected by wealth, power, and the assumption that success equated to legitimacy. It had taken the innocent actions of a 5-year-old girl, carrying on her mother's legacy of kindness, to begin its unraveling. The question now was whether the truth could come to light without history repeating itself in tragic ways. As the truth about Thompson's restaurant emerged, James found himself wrestling with increasingly impossible choices. Each morning he would stare at his reflection in his penthouse windows, barely recognizing the man who had built an empire on unwitting corruption. The daily decisions that once seemed clear-cut, maintaining standards, protecting profits, preserving reputation, now carried the weight of lives in the balance. His relationship with his board of directors deteriorated rapidly. They demanded immediate action to stop the negative publicity, unaware that their prestigious positions were built on criminal foundations. During one particularly heated meeting, a board member suggested having Emily's family relocated for the restaurant's benefit. The casual cruelty of the suggestion made James physically ill, forcing him to confront how he had once thought in similar terms. Emily's situation grew more precarious by the day. Her grandmother's health continued to decline, requiring frequent hospital visits that drained their meager savings. School officials, concerned about her falling grades and exhaustion, threatened to involve child services. The young girl's determination never wavered, but dark circles under her eyes betrayed the toll of her double life. One teacher found her crying in the library during lunch, clutching her mother's old recipe book like a lifeline. The conflict within the restaurant staff reached toxic levels. Those loyal to Michael Stewart began actively sabotaging food preparations, ensuring nothing edible remained for Emily to collect. Others, moved by her plight, risked their jobs to help her. The kitchen became a battlefield of small gestures, food deliberately spoiled or secretly saved, doors locked or left ajar, security cameras turned away or focused with suspicious precision. Robert Wilson faced his own demons as Sarah's death haunted him anew. The weight of his silence had aged him visibly, his hands shaking as he prepared meals, yet he continued to help Emily, knowing each act of kindness might be observed by those who had orchestrated Sarah's murder. His grandchildren were moved to a different school, but the implied threat followed them through anonymous photos and notes left in his locker. Grace Parker's dignity crumbled in the face of mounting medical bills. The proud woman who had once funded a restaurant empire now rationed her medication, choosing between treating her pain and keeping Emily fed. When James anonymously tried to pay her hospital bills, she refused the charity with tears of anger, her pride one of the few things she had left. The same determination that had made her a successful investor now kept her from accepting help from the man she blamed for her family's destruction. The homeless community that depended on Emily's deliveries suffered as the restaurant's security tightened. Mr. Johnson, the veteran, was arrested for loitering while watching over Emily's route. Ms. Rodriguez's children were bullied at school when their reliance on restaurant leftovers became known. The elderly couple, former accountants, faced eviction after anonymous complaints about their apartment. Michael Stewart's personal dissent became apparent in his increasingly erratic behavior. His perfectly maintained facade cracked under pressure, revealing glimpses of the ruthless criminal beneath. Kitchen staff reported him talking to himself, paranoia evident in his constant checking of doors and security cameras. His celebrated cooking segments on local TV became uncomfortable to watch, as he barely contained his rage at minor mistakes. James's private life disintegrated as he pursued the truth. His girlfriend left him, unable to understand his growing obsession with a homeless child. Social invitations dried up as his behavior became increasingly erratic. Nights were spent reviewing security footage and financial records, searching for connections while glasses of expensive wine went untouched. His luxurious penthouse, once a symbol of success, felt like a gilded prison. The investigation began to affect James's health. Insomnia plagued him as he lay awake, haunted by images of Sarah's accident and Emily's nightly rounds. His hands shook during board meetings, his legendary focus shattered by the weight of complicity. The stress manifested in sudden weight loss and frequent migraines, his body rebelling against the constant tension. For Emily, each night brought new challenges. The simple act of collecting food became a complex operation of avoiding security, dodging hostile staff, and protecting her vulnerable beneficiaries. She developed routes through back alleys, learned to read the patterns of security patrols, and created backup plans for her food distribution. At 5 years old, she was playing a deadly game without even knowing it. The emotional toll became evident in quiet moments. Emily was caught singing lullabies to herself while waiting by the restaurant's back door, songs her mother used to sing. Grace would wake from pain-filled nights to find Emily had arranged her pills and water with post-it note reminders, her childish handwriting forming careful instructions. The juxtaposition of childhood innocence and adult responsibility created an almost unbearable poignancy. These personal struggles played out against the backdrop of growing danger. Every act of kindness carried risk. Every decision could trigger catastrophic consequences. The web of corruption that had claimed Sarah's life now threatened to destroy what remained of her family, along with everyone who tried to help them. The question was no longer just about justice, but about survival and whether doing the right thing was worth the ultimate price. Copyright. The scandal broke on a quiet Sunday morning when the New York Times published a front-page expose titled "The Dark Kitchen Crime and Corruption at New York's Most Prestigious Restaurant." The article, carefully researched and legally vetted, detailed the suspicious death of Sarah Parker, the systematic exploitation of Grace Parker's investment, and the ongoing criminal activities hidden behind Thompson's elegant facade. Most devastatingly, it featured a photograph of Emily in her worn coat, waiting by the restaurant's back door. Social media exploded within hours. The image of Emily went viral, shared millions of times with hashtags like Justice Formally and Thompson's Crime. Celebrity chefs who had once praised Michael Stewart publicly denounced him. Former employees came forward with their own stories of witnessing suspicious activities, creating a cascade of revelations that overwhelmed Thompson's PR team. Local news stations set up permanent cameras outside the restaurant, broadcasting live as protesters gathered with signs demanding justice for the Parkers. The contrast between wealthy diners trying to enter the restaurant and angry demonstrators created powerful imagery that played on repeat across national networks. Several prominent politicians called for investigations, sensing an opportunity in the public outrage. Restaurant critics and food bloggers began re-examining their past reviews, finding sinister undertones in what they had once praised as innovation. Stewart's famous secret ingredients and exclusive suppliers took on new meaning as evidence of smuggling emerged. His cooking shows were pulled from networks, and his cookbooks were removed from store shelves. The restaurant's high-profile clientele rapidly distanced themselves. Celebrities posted apologies for their past patronage, politicians returned campaign contributions, and society figures cancelled long-standing reservations. The waiting list that had been years long evaporated overnight. The empty dining room became a symbol of how quickly success could crumble when built on corruption. Health department officials, under public pressure, launched a comprehensive investigation. They discovered irregularities in inspection records, evidence of bribery, and suspicious patterns in food sourcing. Each revelation added fuel to the media firestorm, with public health concerns amplifying the criminal allegations. Financial journalists began digging into Thompson's corporate structure, uncovering a complex web of shell companies and suspicious transactions. Stock prices for associated businesses plummeted as investors fled from any connection to the scandal. Banks froze credit lines, suppliers demanded cash payments, and partners sought to terminate contracts. The human element of the story captivated the public. Emily's nightly food deliveries were reimagined as acts of resistance against corporate greed. Her beneficiaries came forward to share stories of her kindness, creating a narrative that resonated deeply with a public tired of institutional corruption. Grace's loss of her investment became a symbol of how the wealthy exploit the vulnerable. Robert Wilson's role as a secret ally to both Sarah and Emily made him an unexpected hero in the media narrative. His decades of quiet resistance, helping to document the corruption while protecting Emily, captured the public imagination. Interview requests flooded in, though he declined them all, preferring to continue his work in the kitchen. The scandal forced uncomfortable conversations about wealth inequality in the restaurant industry. Other high-end establishments faced scrutiny over their food waste policies and treatment of vulnerable communities. Several restaurants quickly announced new charitable initiatives, though these were largely dismissed as reactive PR moves. Law enforcement agencies found themselves under intense pressure to explain their handling of Sarah Parker's death. Internal Affairs launched investigations into officers who had participated in the original accident investigation. Several resignations followed, accompanied by promises of reform and accountability. The city's homeless population became unexpected participants in the story. Those who had received food from Emily provided compelling interviews about the contrast between restaurant excess and their daily struggles. Their testimonies highlighted the broader social issues underlying the scandal, transforming it from a simple crime story into a dialogue about societal values. Professional organizations within the culinary world scrambled to distance themselves from Thompson's. Michelin stars were suspended, awards were rescinded, and Stewart's membership in prestigious culinary societies was revoked. The industry's rapid rejection of its former stars revealed the fragility of reputation in the face of scandal. Public health advocates used the scandal to push for reforms in food waste policies. The image of Emily distributing discarded food while people dined on $1,000 meals inside became a powerful symbol of broken systems. Several city council members proposed legislation requiring restaurants to donate unused food to charitable organizations. The scandal's impact rippled through New York social circles. Those who had once prided themselves on their Thompson's reservations now claimed they had always suspected something was wrong. Charity galas and social events associated with the restaurant were hastily cancelled or rebranded. The social cost of being connected to Thompson's became too high for even the most influential to bear. As the scandal grew, it exposed deeper issues of systemic corruption and social inequality. What had begun as a story about one restaurant's criminal activities evolved into a broader examination of how wealth and power can shield wrongdoing. The public's emotional investment in Emily's story drove a larger conversation about justice, privilege, and the true cost of luxury built on exploitation. The final confrontation began on a stormy Thursday evening when James Thompson received an urgent text from Robert Wilson: "They're moving tonight. Emily in danger. Back entrance." The message confirmed his worst fears. The criminal organization was preparing to silence all loose ends before fleeing the country. Racing through rain-slicked streets in his Mercedes, James arrived at the restaurant to find Michael Stewart and two unknown men cornering Emily near the dumpsters. The child stood her ground, clutching her mother's notebook to her chest, showing remarkable courage despite being clearly terrified. Stewart's face was contorted with desperation, all pretense of the polished celebrity chef stripped away. "Give me the notebook, you little brat," Stewart snarled, his voice barely audible over the thunderstorm. James watched in horror as one of the men reached for Emily, but before he could intervene, Robert Wilson emerged from the shadows, wielding a heavy cast iron pan. "Back away from her," the elderly chef commanded, his hands steady despite the weapon's weight. The confrontation escalated quickly. Stewart revealed a concealed weapon, forcing Wilson to drop his makeshift defense. Emily, showing wisdom beyond her years, used the distraction to slip behind a dumpster, but remained trapped in the alley. The rain intensified, adding a dramatic backdrop to the standoff that would determine multiple fates. James stepped forward, making his presence known. "It's over, Michael. The FBI has everything: the shipping records, the offshore accounts, the evidence about Sarah's murder." His voice carried an authority he didn't entirely feel, but years of commanding kitchens had taught him how to project confidence. Stewart's response was chilling. "You think you understand what's happening here, James? You're just as guilty as anyone. Your signature's on every document. Your reputation gave us cover. You're going down with us." The truth in these words hit James like a physical blow, but he stood his ground. More players emerged from the shadows. Two of Stewart's loyal line cooks appeared carrying makeshift weapons, but they were matched by other kitchen staff, those who had secretly helped Emily over the months. The alley became a tableau of divided loyalties, with Emily's small figure at the center of the storm. The confrontation took an unexpected turn when Grace Parker appeared at the alley's entrance, supported by Mr. Johnson, the homeless veteran. Despite her illness, she stood straight, her dignity intact. "You killed my daughter," she declared, her voice cutting through the rain. "You won't touch my granddaughter." Stewart's composure cracked further. "Your daughter was stupid enough to think she could play hero. She should have minded her own business, just like you should have been happy with your little investment returns." His words revealed the depth of contempt that had driven their criminal enterprise. But James found himself positioned between Emily and her pursuers, physically embodying the choice he had been struggling with for weeks. His empire was crumbling, his reputation in tatters, but in this moment, protecting a 5-year-old girl seemed the only thing that mattered. The tension reached its peak when police sirens became audible in the distance. Stewart's accomplices began to waver, their loyalty evaporating in the face of imminent arrest. But Stewart himself became more dangerous, realizing he had nothing left to lose. He raised his weapon, aiming first at Emily, then at James. What happened next would be debated in news reports for weeks. Robert Wilson, seeing Stewart's intention, launched himself forward despite his age. Grace Parker screamed a warning. James moved to shield Emily. The gunshot echoed off the alley walls, followed by the clatter of the weapon on wet pavement. When the police arrived moments later, they found a scene that defied easy explanation. Stewart was unconscious, subdued by the combined efforts of loyal kitchen staff. Wilson was bleeding but alive, his intervention having spoiled Stewart's aim. Emily stood protected by a wall of people, staff members, homeless individuals, and James himself, all united in her defense. The evidence Emily had been protecting wasn't just her mother's notebook. Sarah Parker had created a comprehensive record of the criminal enterprise, including photographs, documents, and recordings, all meticulously organized and hidden throughout the restaurant. Her daughter had been unknowingly gathering the final pieces during her nightly food deliveries. As the police led Stewart and his accomplices away, the rain began to ease. Emily finally allowed herself to cry, clinging to her grandmother while Robert Wilson was treated by paramedics. James watched the scene unfold, understanding that this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment he first noticed Emily on his security cameras. The alley behind Thompson's, long a symbol of the divide between wealth and poverty, had become the battleground where these worlds finally collided. In the end, it wasn't wealth or power that determined the outcome, but the collective courage of ordinary people choosing to stand up for what was right. The police raid on Thompson's restaurant unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance, with multiple agencies moving simultaneously across the city. FBI agents breached the wine cellar, where they discovered hidden compartments containing evidence of years of smuggling operations. DA teams swept through the kitchen, documenting how legitimate ingredients had been used to conceal illicit shipments. IIS investigators seized computers and financial records from the corporate offices. Meanwhile, Emily and Grace found themselves trapped in their apartment as Stewart's associates attempted to silence them before the authorities could arrive. The building's fire alarm blared, forcing other residents to evacuate, but Grace's condition made quick movement impossible. Emily, displaying remarkable presence of mind, helped her grandmother into the bathroom, barricading the door with furniture as heavy footsteps approached their unit. James, alerted to the danger by Robert Wilson's emergency text, raced through city streets toward their apartment. His driver's training from his military days came rushing back as he weaved through traffic, knowing every second counted. Behind him, a dark SUV gave chase, its occupants clearly intent on reaching Emily first. Inside the apartment, Emily's quick thinking bought precious time. She used her knowledge of the building's layout, gained from years of careful observation, to create diversions. Running water in multiple sinks confused the intruders about their location. Her small size allowed her to move through the maintenance access panel behind their refrigerator, a secret she had discovered during her careful planning of escape routes. Robert Wilson, despite his injuries from the earlier confrontation, coordinated with Emily's network of homeless friends. Mr. Johnson organized lookouts around the building's perimeter, while Ms. Rodriguez helped evacuating residents, ensuring no one revealed Emily's true location. The elderly couple who had helped document the financial crimes used their knowledge of the building's infrastructure to cut power to specific floors, disorienting the pursuers. The chase through the building's service corridors became increasingly desperate. Emily led the intruders away from her grandmother's location, using her small size to advantage as she squeezed through maintenance spaces and ventilation access points. Her months of delivering food through back alleys had taught her every possible route and hiding place. James arrived at the building to find chaos. Fire trucks responded to the alarm, police were en route, and suspicious figures lurked in the shadows. Using his authority as a prominent businessman, he convinced first responders to implement a building-wide search, effectively trapping Stewart's men inside. The net was closing, but Emily and Grace remained in danger. The decisive moment came when Emily, running out of options, found herself cornered in the building's laundry room. As footsteps approached, she remembered her mother's lessons about using kitchen resources creatively. She quickly created a barrier of laundry soap on the floor and positioned herself near the industrial washing machines. When the first attacker burst through the door, he slipped on the soap slick, crashing into his companions. Emily seized the moment to activate all the washing machines simultaneously, filling the room with steam and confusion. The industrial-grade machine's noise covered the sound of her escape through the laundry chute, a route she had noted months ago but hoped never to use. James and the police breach team reached Grace's apartment to find her still safely barricaded in the bathroom. The furniture blockade had held, buying crucial time. As SWAT teams cleared the building floor by floor, Emily's network of allies helped identify and track the remaining threats. The final confrontation occurred in the building's parking garage. Stewart's men, realizing they were trapped, attempted to shoot their way out. Police snipers, positioned according to Mr. Johnson's expert military advice, quickly contained the situation. Emily's careful planning and the combined efforts of her unlikely allies had prevented any casualties. But in the aftermath, evidence of the organization's reach continued to emerge. Hidden cameras were discovered throughout the building, suggesting long-term surveillance. A makeshift command center was found in a vacant apartment, containing files on everyone involved in Emily's food distribution network. The thoroughness of their operation was matched only by the determination of those who had worked to protect her. The raid yielded stunning results, detailed records of international criminal transactions, evidence linking Stewart to multiple unsolved crimes, and proof of law enforcement corruption. Emily's simple acts of charity had unknowingly documented the organization's movements as she observed their patterns while conducting her food deliveries. As the situation stabilized, the full scope of what had transpired became clear. Emily's nightly routine, born from a desire to help others and honor her mother's memory, had created a network of allies strong enough to resist a powerful criminal organization. Her childhood wisdom had outmaneuvered adult criminals, proving that compassion could be more powerful than corruption. The scene in the apartment building's lobby, as Emily finally reunited with her grandmother, captured the evening's essence. Police officers, first responders, and Emily's homeless friends stood together, boundaries of social status temporarily erased by their shared purpose. James Thompson, his clothes disheveled from the chase, watched as the 5-year-old girl who had changed his life hugged each of her protectors in turn, her mother's spirit evident in every gracious gesture. The immediate aftermath of the raid brought a flurry of arrests that shook New York's culinary and business communities. Michael Stewart was led out of Thompson's in handcuffs, his chef's whites exchanged for prison orange. High-ranking police officials, corrupt health inspectors, and several prominent business figures were also taken into custody. The organized crime network that had operated beneath the veneer of fine dining began to crumble. Evidence from Sarah Parker's detailed documentation revealed a criminal enterprise far more extensive than initially suspected. International smuggling routes disguised as specialty ingredient sourcing, money laundering through inflated wine purchases, and systematic bribery of officials had generated millions in illegal profits. The investigation expanded to other high-end restaurants across multiple cities, suggesting a network that had infected much of the luxury dining industry. James Thompson found himself in a complex legal position. While he hadn't knowingly participated in the criminal activities, his signature appeared on countless dubious documents. His lawyers worked frantically to negotiate a deal with prosecutors, offering full cooperation in exchange for consideration of his unwitting involvement. The question of his moral responsibility, however, weighed heavier than any legal consequences. Grace Parker's role as an early investor was finally acknowledged publicly. Financial forensics revealed how her investment had been systematically stolen through fraudulent paperwork and manipulated contracts. The discovery created a legal precedent for investigating similar schemes in other businesses, leading to broader reforms in investor protection regulations. Emily's food distribution network emerged as a crucial element in documenting the criminal activities. Her regular observations of late-night deliveries, suspicious meetings, and unusual patterns had unknowingly created a thorough record of the organization's movements. The homeless community she served had become an informal surveillance network, their presence in back alleys and service entrances making them invisible witnesses to criminal activities. Robert Wilson's years of quiet resistance were recognized by law enforcement. His careful documentation, combined with Sarah Parker's records, provided prosecutors with a comprehensive timeline of the organization's evolution. Though still recovering from injuries sustained during the confrontation, he worked tirelessly with investigators, finally able to fulfill his promise to Sarah by helping bring her killers to justice. The restaurant industry underwent immediate changes. Health department officials implemented stricter oversight of waste disposal and ingredient sourcing. Several high-end establishments voluntarily opened their books for audit, desperate to distance themselves from Thompson's scandal. The practice of discarding edible food came under intense scrutiny, leading to partnerships with food banks and homeless shelters. Emily's story became a symbol of both tragedy and hope. Media coverage focused on her resilience in continuing her mother's mission of feeding the hungry, even as she unknowingly gathered evidence against her mother's killers. Her small figure in the worn blue coat became an iconic image, representing the contrast between wealth and poverty that had allowed criminal enterprises to flourish. The initial legal proceedings moved swiftly. Michael Stewart and his core associates, facing overwhelming evidence, began negotiating plea deals. Their testimonies implicated higher-level organized crime figures, leading to international investigations. Sarah Parker's death was officially reclassified as homicide, with multiple conspirators charged in her murder. Grace's health stabilized with proper medical care, funded by the first recovery of stolen assets. The apartment building where she and Emily lived was purchased by a community trust, ensuring they could remain in their home without fear of eviction. The elderly couple who had helped document the financial crimes were hired as consultants for the ongoing investigation, their expertise finally recognized and valued. James Thompson's personal transformation became part of the public narrative. His decision to protect Emily during the final confrontation, risking his own safety and fortune, suggested the possibility of redemption. Though his business empire was irreparably damaged, his cooperation with authorities and commitment to making amends earned cautious respect from former critics. The homeless community that had protected Emily saw immediate benefits from the investigation's first phase. Evidence of systematic harassment by private security firms hired to clean up. The areas around luxury establishments led to policy changes and increased protection for vulnerable populations. Mr. Johnson and other veterans were offered positions in legitimate security operations, their skills and integrity finally properly valued. Ms. Rodriguez and her children moved into stable housing, supported by a victims assistance program. Her testimony about Emily's food deliveries, combined with evidence of how the criminal organization had exploited vulnerable families, sparked reforms in social services and housing assistance programs. The children returned to school, no longer hungry or afraid. The initial resolution brought as many questions as answers. How had such extensive corruption gone undetected for so long? What role had society's willingness to ignore poverty played in enabling criminal enterprises? Could the relationships between wealthy establishments and their communities be fundamentally changed? The answers would unfold in the months ahead, but the immediate impact of Emily's courage and compassion was undeniable. The restaurant itself stood empty, its elegant dining rooms silent. But the back alley, where Emily had waited patiently each night, became an unexpected symbol of transformation. Local artists painted a mural there, depicting a small girl sharing food with a diverse group of people, while shadowy figures in the background were brought into the light. It served as a reminder that justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources, and that true power lies not in wealth or influence, but in the simple act of caring for others. Your support through subscribing means everything to us as we continue sharing these powerful stories of human resilience and justice. Each subscription helps us reach more people with tales that need to be told, inspiring positive change in our community. Thank you for being part of this journey. The victory against corruption came with devastating personal tolls that would haunt all involved. Robert Wilson, despite surviving the confrontation, faced months of grueling physical therapy for injuries sustained protecting Emily. At 65, his body struggled to heal from the gunshot wound, ending his 40-year culinary career. The old chef spent sleepless nights in his small apartment, replaying the years he'd stayed silent about Sarah's death, wondering if speaking up sooner might have spared Emily her ordeal. Grace Parker's health deteriorated significantly from the stress of the ordeal. The doctors discovered that the prolonged period without proper medication had caused irreversible damage to her joints. Even with the best medical care now available, she would never regain full mobility. Her proud spirit struggled with dependency, particularly when she could no longer help Emily with simple tasks like preparing breakfast or combing her hair. Emily's childhood innocence became another casualty of the events. Nightmares plagued her sleep, filled with images of the confrontation and her mother's accident. School counselors noted concerning changes in her behavior. She became hyper-vigilant, startling at sudden noises and constantly checking exits. Her drawings, once filled with colorful foods and happy people, now featured dark alleys and shadowy figures. The homeless community that had protected Emily faced brutal retaliation from other criminal organizations affected by the investigation. Mr. Johnson's car, his only shelter, was vandalized beyond repair. Ms. Rodriguez received threatening notes at her new apartment, forcing another relocation. The elderly couple who had helped document the financial crimes discovered their identity documents had been stolen, leaving them vulnerable to further exploitation. James Thompson's personal life crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny and private guilt. His engagement ended, his friends disappeared, and his family publicly disowned him to protect their own business interests. Insomnia became his constant companion as he lay awake in his now empty penthouse, haunted by memories of all the signs he'd ignored over the years. The restaurant staff, both innocent and complicit, suffered their own consequences. Those who had helped Emily lost their jobs as the restaurant closed, their association with the scandal making it difficult to find new positions despite their integrity. Even those who had remained neutral found their careers tainted by connection to Thompson's, their professional reputations collateral damage in the fallout. The most profound costs were psychological. Emily's young mind struggled to process the complexity of events, her natural compassion now warring with newfound distrust. She would spend hours organizing and reorganizing her mother's recipes, seeking comfort in their familiar instructions while trying to understand why helping others had led to such danger. Her grandmother often found her asleep surrounded by these papers, tear tracks visible on her cheeks. The investigation had exposed corruption but couldn't heal the deep wounds it left behind. Physical recovery might be measured in months, but the emotional trauma would take years to process. Each participant in the drama carried their own burden of guilt, fear, and loss, their lives forever altered by the pursuit of justice. Yet beneath the weight of these personal costs lay an undercurrent of transformation. The shared experience had created unbreakable bonds between unlikely allies, forging a new kind of family from the fragments of broken lives. In their collective healing, they would eventually find strength they didn't know they possessed, though the path forward remained daunting and uncertain. The collapse of Thompson's restaurant empire sent shockwaves through the culinary world that reverberated far beyond New York's fine dining scene. The flagship restaurant, once a beacon of culinary excellence, stood empty and dark, its windows papered over with newspaper headlines detailing its dramatic fall. The Michelin stars that had once gleamed proudly above the entrance were quietly removed one rainy morning, symbolizing the end of an era. All 15 restaurants in the Thompson chain closed their doors within weeks of the scandal breaking. Over 300 employees found themselves suddenly unemployed, from renowned chefs to dishwashers. The impact hit hardest during the holiday season, leaving families struggling to survive while bearing the stigma of association with a corrupted brand. Even staff members who had worked at locations untouched by criminal activity found their resumes tainted by the Thompson name. The financial devastation spread like wildfire through the supply chain. Small farmers who had exclusively supplied Thompson's restaurants faced bankruptcy. Artisanal producers who had built their businesses around the restaurant's demands saw years of work evaporate overnight. Wine merchants were left holding millions in inventory specifically curated for Thompson's cellars, now worthless without their prestigious buyer. Real estate values in neighborhoods surrounding Thompson's restaurants plummeted. Other businesses that had benefited from the restaurant's overflow traffic struggled to survive. Luxury boutiques, high-end bars, and complimentary services that had clustered around Thompson's locations found themselves in rapidly deteriorating neighborhoods as the wealthy clientele disappeared. The corporate structure imploded spectacularly. Shareholders watched their investments evaporate as stock prices fell to pennies. Insurance companies denied claims, citing criminal activity exclusions. The banks called in loans, forcing fire sales of assets. The sophisticated financial network that had once protected the empire's wealth became a trap, preventing even legitimate assets from being salvaged. International partnerships crumbled as the scandal spread globally. Hotels that had paid premium licensing fees to host Thompson-branded restaurants frantically rebranded their dining spaces. Cookbook publishers pulped thousands of copies of Michael Stewart's works. Television networks scrambled to fill programming slots once occupied by cooking shows featuring Thompson's chefs. The culinary school associated with Thompson's, once a prestigious launching pad for aspiring chefs, closed mid-semester. Students were left with massive loans but worthless credentials, their dreams of culinary careers tainted by association. Staff members who had dedicated their careers to education found their teaching references meaningless in the industry's new reality. Perhaps most devastating was the destruction of the innovation and creativity that had legitimately flourished within Thompson's kitchens. Groundbreaking culinary techniques, revolutionary flavor combinations, and genuine gastronomic advances were now dismissed as potential covers for criminal activity. The restaurant's genuine contributions to culinary arts were lost in the shadow of its crimes. The business fallout created a void in the city's fine dining ecosystem that would take years to fill. The collapse of Thompson's revealed how deeply intertwined legitimate business and corrupt practices had become, forcing the entire industry to confront uncomfortable truths about its operations and values. The emotional aftermath of the Thompson's scandal settled like a heavy fog over all involved, each person carrying their own unique burden of guilt, regret, and shattered illusions. James Thompson found himself wandering the empty halls of his flagship restaurant late at night, the silence of the once bustling kitchen a deafening reminder of how far pride could fall. In quiet moments, he would stand at the back door where Emily had waited so patiently, the weight of his willful ignorance crushing his spirit. Emily's nightmares became more frequent, her young mind struggling to process the trauma. She would wake up screaming about dark figures chasing her through endless restaurant corridors, calling for a mother who could no longer protect her. Grace would hold her granddaughter during these episodes, her own tears falling silently as she shouldered the double burden of grief for her daughter and fear for her granddaughter's lost innocence. Robert Wilson's retirement was marked not by celebration but by quiet desperation. His hands, once steady enough to create culinary masterpieces, now shook with the memory of violence. The chef spent hours writing detailed accounts of everything he had witnessed over the years, as if putting the truth on paper could somehow absolve him of his years of silence. His grandchildren's visits became painful reminders of the childhood Emily had lost. The homeless community that had been part of Emily's food distribution network felt the loss of purpose most keenly. Mr. Johnson would still stand guard at his old post near the restaurant, protecting a door that no longer opened. MS. Rodriguez's children would ask daily when little Emily would bring more food, their innocent questions piercing their mother's heart. The elderly couple, who had helped document the fraud, spent their days organizing their evidence notebooks over and over, trying to find meaning in the chaos. Staff members who had turned a blind eye to the corruption found themselves haunted by memories of small moments when they could have spoken up. Late-night conversations in empty bars revolved around shared guilt and missed opportunities. Those who had actively helped Emily faced different demons, questioning whether they could have done more to protect her or expose the truth sooner. The weight of lost dreams pressed heavily on the culinary students whose careers had been derailed. Their kitchen whites hung unused in closets, their knife sets gathered dust, and their passion for cooking was tainted by association with corruption. Many found themselves unable to even enter restaurants, the smell of professional kitchens triggering anxiety attacks. Perhaps the most profound emotional toll was the loss of trust. Emily's natural inclination to help others warred with her new understanding of human darkness. Grace's belief in justice was shaken by how long corruption had gone unchecked. James's confidence in his own judgment lay in ruins, along with his sense of purpose and identity. Even the city itself seemed changed, its celebrated food culture now viewed through a lens of suspicion and doubt. These emotional wounds ran deeper than any financial loss or legal consequence. They touched the fundamental human needs for safety, trust, and belief in justice. The scandal had stripped away not just livelihoods and reputations, but also the comforting illusions that had allowed each person to make sense of their world. In their place remained raw truth and the daunting task of rebuilding not just careers and relationships, but faith in humanity itself. The final piece of Sarah Parker's puzzle emerged 6 months after the initial arrests, hidden where no one had thought to look within Emily's beloved collection of her mother's recipes. Grace, organizing the worn papers during her recovery, discovered that Sarah had used an old family cipher to hide evidence within seemingly innocent cooking instructions. Each recipe, when decoded, revealed detailed accounts of criminal activities she had witnessed at Thompson's. The recipe for Mother's Special Marinara contained records of money laundering operations with ingredients quantities representing transaction amounts, family celebration cake, documented meetings between Michael Stewart and known criminal figures, dates concealed within baking temperatures and times. Most devastating was the emergency comfort soup, which outlined Sarah's discovery of the truth and her final plans to expose everything. FBI cryptographers, working with Grace's help to break the code, uncovered a network far more extensive than initially revealed. Sarah had documented not just local criminal activities, but international connections reaching into the highest levels of government and business. The simple notebook, which Emily had carried faithfully every night, contained enough evidence to trigger investigations across 3 continents. Sarah's final entry, written the night before her death, revealed her desperate attempt to protect her daughter. She had recognized the danger she was in, but couldn't remain silent about the corruption she had uncovered. The entry included a heartbreaking letter to Emily, explaining her choices and expressing hope that someday her daughter would understand why she had risked everything for the truth. The decoded evidence revealed that Sarah had been methodically gathering proof for over 2 years. She had created an ingenious system of documentation, using her position in the kitchen to observe and record criminal activities without raising suspicion. Her attention to detail as a chef had served her well in this secret mission, as she noted precise times, amounts, and participants in each illegal transaction. More shocking were the recordings Sarah had managed to hide throughout the restaurant. Tiny devices disguised as ordinary kitchen equipment had captured hundreds of hours of incriminating conversations. These recordings had continued to function long after her death, unknowingly documenting the very conspirators who had orchestrated her murder as they continued their operations. The evidence implicated several high-ranking police officials who had helped cover up Sarah's murder. Their involvement explained why the initial investigation had been so quickly dismissed as an accident. The corruption reached into the district attorney's office, with certain prosecutors having deliberately buried evidence that could have exposed the truth years earlier. Emily's nightly food distribution route, it turned out, had unknowingly followed the same path her mother used to track suspicious deliveries. The people Emily helped were often in locations that provided perfect vantage points for observing the restaurant's illegal activities. Sarah had built relationships with these same community members, using their observations to verify her suspicions. The decoded recipes also revealed something that brought both pain and pride to Grace. Sarah had discovered the truth about how her mother's investment had been stolen. She had been gathering evidence to restore Grace's rightful ownership of the restaurant, determined to right the wrong done to her family. This discovery had likely been what sealed her fate, as it threatened to expose the criminal organization's origins. The final evidence painted a picture of a mother torn between exposing corruption and protecting her child. Sarah had created multiple contingency plans, including trust funds and safety deposits hidden under aliases, intended to protect Emily if anything happened to her. She had even documented emergency procedures for Grace to follow, though these instructions had been lost in the chaos following her death. As federal agents pieced together Sarah's evidence, they uncovered a level of forethought and courage that left even hardened investigators moved. She had known the risks, understood the likely consequences, yet had persisted in gathering evidence, driven by a determination to create a more just world for her daughter. The recipe notebook, which had seemed like a simple collection of family memories, was revealed as Sarah's final gift to Emily, not just evidence of crimes, but proof of her mother's incredible courage and integrity. Each encoded recipe represented not just criminal evidence, but a mother's love and determination to protect both her child and her principles, even at the ultimate cost. The revelation of Sarah Parker's encoded recipe book ignited a media firestorm that transcended the original scandal. Major newspapers ran front-page stories with titles like A Mother's Final Recipe Justice, Served Cold, and Kitchen Confidential, How a Chef's Codes Cracked a Criminal Empire. The public's fascination with the combination of culinary expertise and covert documentation captured the nation's imagination. Social media exploded with trending hashtags like Sarah's Recipes and Justice in the Kitchen. Food bloggers began analyzing Sarah's actual recipes, discovering that even the legitimate cooking instructions were masterpieces of culinary innovation. Her dual legacy as both a brilliant chef and a courageous whistleblower sparked intense discussions about morality in the restaurant industry. Television networks scrambled to produce documentaries about Sarah's life and death. Food Network aired a special series examining how she had used her culinary knowledge to create an unbreakable code. True crime channels focused on the brilliant way she had hidden recording devices in kitchen equipment. Each new revelation added layers to the public's understanding of her sacrifice. The homeless community that had been part of both Sarah's and Emily's networks became unexpected celebrities. News crews sought interviews with those who had unknowingly helped monitor criminal activities. Their stories of Sarah's kindness, combined with her strategic use of their observations, painted a picture of someone who had merged compassion with justice in remarkable ways. Professional chefs worldwide began incorporating tributes to Sarah in their menus. High-end restaurants offered Sarah Parker specials with proceeds going to anti-corruption initiatives and food security programs. Culinary schools added ethics courses to their curricula, using her story to teach the importance of integrity in the industry. The public's emotional investment in the story intensified when Emily's role became clear. The image of a 5-year-old girl unknowingly carrying crucial evidence while feeding the hungry seemed almost too perfectly poignant to be real. News outlets handled this aspect with unusual sensitivity, respecting the family's privacy while celebrating Emily's unconscious role in completing her mother's mission. Law enforcement agencies faced intense public scrutiny over their initial handling of Sarah's death. Protests erupted outside police headquarters when details of the cover-up emerged. Reform activists used the case to demand changes in how police investigated suspicious deaths, particularly those involving corporate interests. The culinary industry underwent a profound period of self-examination. Restaurant groups rushed to establish whistleblower protection programs. Food safety and financial transparency became major talking points at industry conferences. The fear that other establishments might be hiding similar secrets led to a wave of voluntary audits and policy changes. Grace Parker's story sparked discussions about investor protection and corporate accountability. Business schools used the case to examine how legitimate enterprises could be corrupted from within. The sophisticated way Sarah had documented financial crimes became a case study in forensic accounting programs. The public's response went beyond mere interest in scandal. People were moved by the multiple layers of the story: a mother's love, a daughter's unwitting courage, a grandmother's lost dreams, and a community's role in serving justice. The human elements transformed what could have been a simple true crime story into a powerful narrative about integrity, sacrifice, and redemption. As Sarah's coded recipes were carefully deciphered and published with sensitive information redacted, they became bestsellers. People were fascinated by how she had woven complex criminal evidence into seemingly simple cooking instructions. Each recipe told two stories, one about food and family, another about corruption and courage. The impact rippled through popular culture. Multiple book deals were offered for the story. Hollywood producers competed for movie rights. Television shows incorporated elements of the case into their plots. Sarah Parker became a symbol of quiet resistance and moral courage, her story inspiring others to speak up against corruption in their own industries. Perhaps most significantly, the public reaction created lasting change in how society viewed the relationship between wealth, power, and accountability. Sarah's methodical documentation of criminal activities, combined with Emily's innocent distribution of food to the hungry, highlighted the stark contrasts that had allowed corruption to flourish. The story's ability to unite people across social and economic boundaries proved remarkable. Wealthy restaurateurs and homeless individuals found themselves discussing the same events from different perspectives. The public conversation expanded beyond the specific case to address broader issues of social justice, corporate responsibility, and moral courage. James Thompson's personal revelation came gradually, like a complex sauce reducing to reveal its essential truth. Sitting alone in his penthouse reviewing Sarah's decoded recipes, he finally understood the full weight of his willful ignorance. Each recipe entry forced him to confront how his pursuit of success had blinded him to the corruption festering within his empire. The realization that his signature appeared on documents that had helped cover up Sarah's murder left him physically ill. Emily's understanding of her mother evolved as Grace carefully shared appropriate portions of Sarah's story. The 5-year-old began to see her nightly food deliveries not just as acts of kindness, but as a continuation of her mother's legacy. Her pride in carrying the recipe book everywhere took on new meaning, though Grace carefully protected her from the darker aspects of the evidence it contained. Emily's nightmares gradually transformed, with her mother now appearing as a guardian angel rather than a haunting absence. Grace experienced the most profound personal transformation. Learning how methodically Sarah had worked to expose the theft of her investment while protecting Emily gave her renewed strength. Her daughter's courage helped her overcome the shame of having lost the family's financial security, replacing it with fierce pride. During her physical therapy sessions, Grace would recite Sarah's recipes from memory, drawing determination from each hidden message of resistance. Robert Wilson's guilt over his years of silence transformed into a dedication to preserving Sarah's legacy. He began working with culinary schools to develop ethics programs, sharing his first-hand experience of how silence enables corruption. His testimony about watching Sarah's investigation unfold, combined with his own detailed observations over the years, provided crucial context for prosecutors building cases against higher-level conspirators. The homeless community that had been part of Sarah's unofficial surveillance network discovered a new sense of purpose. Mr. Johnson, learning how his regular observations had contributed to Sarah's investigation, began training other veterans in security and observation techniques. MS. Rodriguez organized community watch programs, teaching others how to document and report suspicious activities safely. For the restaurant staff who had remained ignorant of the corruption, the revelations brought mixed emotions. Many struggled with guilt over not noticing the signs, while others felt betrayed by colleagues they had trusted. Those who had helped Emily now understood they had been part of a larger mission, though this knowledge brought both pride and renewed grief for Sarah's death. Michael Stewart, facing life imprisonment, experienced his own devastating revelation. Sarah's meticulous documentation stripped away his carefully constructed image, revealing him as a man who had sacrificed his genuine culinary talent for criminal gain. In custody, he would obsessively write his own recipes, perhaps trying to recapture the passion for food he had lost to greed. The elderly couple who had helped document financial discrepancies found validation in Sarah's encoded notes. Their own careful records had paralleled her investigation, though they hadn't known it at the time. Their expertise gained new respect as they helped investigators understand the complex financial aspects of the evidence. Emily's school teachers gained new insight into their quiet, determined student. The girl who carefully shared her lunch and helped struggling classmates now appeared as her mother's daughter in more ways than anyone had realized. Her academic performance improved as she began to understand that education had been important to her mother's ability to expose wrongdoing. James's journey to redemption began with these personal revelations. He started viewing his wealth not as a measure of success, but as a tool for restitution. The man who had once scorned charity as weakness now understood how his own moral weakness had enabled criminal exploitation of the vulnerable. Sarah's final recipe entry, a letter to Emily encoded in instructions for legacy soup, became a turning point for everyone involved. The simple love expressed in her words, combined with her unwavering determination to fight corruption, helped each person find their own path forward. Grace found strength in her daughter's courage, Emily found pride in continuing her mother's mission of feeding the hungry, and James found purpose in transforming his remaining resources toward justice. The personal revelations extended beyond the immediate circle. Other restaurant owners began examining their own practices, recognizing how easily oversight could become willful ignorance. Social workers gained new perspectives on how small acts of kindness, like Emily's food distribution, could mask deeper systemic issues requiring attention. These individual transformations, sparked by Sarah's encoded recipes, proved as significant as the criminal evidence they contained. Each person touched by the case emerged changed, their understanding of responsibility, courage, and justice fundamentally altered by the story of a chef who had used her culinary skills to fight corruption while protecting her daughter's future. Justice arrived in waves, each more significant than the last. The first round of convictions focused on Michael Stewart and his immediate associates. The evidence from Sarah's encoded recipes proved devastating in court, leaving no room for plea bargains. Stewart received multiple life sentences for Sarah's murder, racketeering, and numerous other charges. His famous face, once featured on cooking shows, now appeared on prison documentation. The investigation expanded internationally, following leads hidden in Sarah's recipes. Law enforcement agencies across 3 continents coordinated raids on connected criminal enterprises. The sophisticated money laundering network that had used high-end restaurants as fronts collapsed. Bank accounts were frozen, assets seized, and dozens of seemingly legitimate business figures found themselves facing criminal charges. Grace Parker's investment case became a landmark in corporate fraud litigation. The clear documentation Sarah had provided of how her mother's shares had been stolen led to new precedents in investor protection law. The courts ordered not just financial restitution, but structural changes in how restaurant investments were managed and monitored. Grace's story became required reading in business ethics courses. Local law enforcement underwent substantial reform. The officers who had helped cover up Sarah's murder faced justice, their careers and freedom forfeit. But the police department established new protocols for investigating deaths involving corporate interests, with mandatory oversight from multiple agencies. Sarah's case became a teaching tool at the police academy, demonstrating how corruption could infect investigations. The health department officials who had ignored violations at Thompson's restaurants faced their own legal consequences. Their trial exposed a broader pattern of bribery and negligence in food safety oversight. The resulting reforms strengthened inspection processes and created new protections for whistleblowers in the food service industry. James Thompson's cooperation proved crucial in securing convictions. Though he faced penalties for his negligent oversight, his active assistance in exposing the full scope of corruption earned him consideration. The courts mandated that he use his remaining resources to establish a foundation supporting food security and anti-corruption initiatives, turning his business expertise toward restitution. The legal system's response extended beyond criminal proceedings. Civil courts processed dozens of related cases, from wrongful termination suits filed by former employees to class action lawsuits from defrauded investors. Each case added new layers of accountability and established stronger protections against similar schemes. Most significantly, Emily and Grace finally received formal recognition of their family's role in exposing the corruption. The courts ensured their future security through proper management of recovered assets. Sarah's posthumous whistleblower status entitled them to substantial rewards from the recovery of illegal proceeds, though both insisted most of it go to supporting food security programs. The justice system's thorough response to the case sent ripples through the restaurant industry. Other establishments rushed to address similar vulnerabilities, leading to a wave of self-reporting and voluntary reforms. The fear of being another Thompson's drove significant changes in how high-end restaurants handled their finances and operations. The process of healing began in small ways, like tender shoots emerging after a forest fire. Emily's nightmares gradually subsided, replaced by dreams of cooking with her mother in a warm, safe kitchen. Her school counselor noted significant improvements in her emotional stability as she began to understand her role in completing her mother's mission. The pride of carrying on Sarah's legacy of helping others gave her a sense of purpose unusual for a child her age. Grace's physical recovery paralleled her emotional healing. With proper medical care finally accessible, her rheumatoid arthritis became manageable. More importantly, the validation of her daughter's courage and the return of her stolen investment restored her sense of dignity. She began teaching Emily to cook using Sarah's actual recipes, these shared moments becoming a form of therapy for both grandmother and granddaughter. Robert Wilson found peace in mentoring young chefs, emphasizing ethics alongside culinary skills. His cooking classes for homeless youth, conducted in a community center kitchen, helped him process his guilt while creating positive change. The sound of laughter and sizzling pans replaced the haunting memories of Sarah's last days. His grandchildren became regular helpers in these classes, bridging the generation gap with flour-dusted hands. James Thompson's redemption came through active participation in rebuilding what his negligence had helped destroy. He worked alongside community organizations to establish food security programs, his business expertise now serving a greater purpose. The man who once dismissed poverty as laziness found himself learning from and working with the very people he had previously ignored. The homeless community that had supported Emily's mission experienced their own healing. Mr. Johnson secured permanent housing through a veterans program and began working as a security consultant. Ms. Rodriguez completed her nursing degree with support from a foundation established in Sarah's name. The elderly couple who had helped document the fraud became respected advisors on financial literacy programs for low-income families. Even the restaurant's former staff found ways to heal. Those who had remained silent out of fear now spoke openly about their experiences, helping others recognize and report corruption. The kitchen workers who had helped Emily created a cooperative catering business built on principles of transparency and community service. Their success proved that ethical business practices could thrive in the culinary world. Emily's school became a model for integrating emotional support with education. Her teachers developed programs helping children process trauma through creative expression and community service. The school's garden project, inspired by Emily's story, taught students about food security while providing fresh produce for local shelters. The healing extended to the broader community. Regular gatherings in the former restaurant space, now converted into a community kitchen, brought together people from all walks of life. Cooking classes, shared meals, and food distribution programs created new bonds between formerly divided social groups. The space that had once symbolized corruption became a center for healing and connection. These personal transformations, though less dramatic than the legal victories, proved equally important in creating lasting change. Each person touched by the scandal found their own path to recovery, often by helping others heal as well. The cycle of trauma began to break, replaced by a network of support and understanding that crossed social and economic boundaries. On the 5th anniversary of Sarah Parker's case resolution, the transformed Thompson's building hummed with activity. The former five-star restaurant had become Sarah's Kitchen, a revolutionary hybrid space combining a community food center, culinary school, and social justice hub. The elegant dining rooms now hosted free cooking classes for underprivileged youth, while the state-of-the-art kitchen served as a training facility for aspiring chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds. 10-year-old Emily, now thriving in school and following in her mother's culinary footsteps, spent afternoons teaching other children how to cook simple, nutritious meals. Her natural teaching ability and gentle patience reflected Sarah's spirit, while her innovative approaches to combining flavors suggested she had inherited her mother's culinary talent. Grace watched from her comfortable chair in the corner, her eyes bright with pride as she witnessed her granddaughter's growing confidence. James Thompson, transformed by years of genuine community service, worked alongside former homeless individuals in managing the center's operations. His business acumen, once used to build personal wealth, now ensured the sustainable operation of multiple food security programs. The man who had once avoided the back alley now regularly joined Emily in delivering meals to homebound elderly residents. The center's walls displayed Sarah's decoded recipes, each one accompanied by the story of how it had helped expose corruption while feeding the hungry. These installations served as both historical record and inspiration, reminding visitors that justice and compassion could flourish in unexpected ways. Culinary students studied not only cooking techniques but also the ethical principles Sarah had woven into her work. Robert Wilson, though retired from professional cooking, led weekly masterclasses where he shared both culinary wisdom and life lessons about integrity. His sessions always ended with preparing meals for local shelters, continuing the tradition of care that Sarah had begun. His grandchildren, now teenagers, worked alongside Emily in the youth cooking programs, creating a next generation of conscious culinary leaders. The community that had supported Emily's mission flourished. Mr. Johnson headed the center's security team, ensuring that the space remained safe and welcoming for all. MS Rodriguez coordinated health education programs alongside cooking classes. The elderly couple who had helped document the fraud now taught financial literacy alongside basic cooking skills, helping others avoid exploitation while learning to feed themselves well. Sarah's Kitchen became a model for similar centers across the country, demonstrating how combining food security with education and community building could create lasting social change. The foundation established from recovered assets supported the expansion of this model, while Emily's story inspired others to see how small acts of kindness could spark significant transformations. Most importantly, the center embodied the spirit of both mother and daughter Sarah's courage in fighting corruption and Emily's simple dedication to feeding the hungry. Each meal served, each student taught, each community connection forged represented a small victory over the greed and corruption they had fought to expose. The back alley, where Emily had once waited patiently for leftover food, became a thriving community garden, its produce used in cooking classes and meal programs. The security cameras that had once documented her solitary mission now captured stories of community, healing, and hope. The transformation was complete, from a symbol of excess and corruption to a beacon of justice and compassion. As evening fell on this anniversary day, Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, watching people gather for the community dinner. Her mother's recipe book, worn but precious, rested in her apron pocket, its pages now containing not only the evidence that had brought justice, but also the dreams of a new generation learning to use food as a force for good. The legacy of a mother's love and courage had blossomed into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. In a world where wealth often overshadows worth, Emily's story reminds us that the smallest hands can carry the heaviest burdens of justice. A 5-year-old girl collecting leftover food revealed more courage than those in suits and ties, while a mother's love encoded in recipes proved stronger than an empire built on greed. Through Sarah's sacrifice, Grace's dignity, and Emily's innocence, we learn that true power lies not in what we own, but in what we give. Each meal shared, each act of kindness, each stand against corruption ripples through time, changing lives in ways we may never know. Remember, when you see a child's kindness, you might be witnessing a hero's first steps. When you pass someone in need, you could be ignoring tomorrow's champion of justice. In the end, it's not our wealth that defines us, but the courage to do what's right when the world looks away. Sometimes the greatest revolutions start with a simple act of sharing food with those who hunger, not just for meals, but for justice, dignity, and hope. What small act of kindness will you choose today? If this story of justice, redemption, and compassion has touched your heart, please consider subscribing to support our team in bringing more powerful narratives to light. Share this video with friends and family who might find inspiration in Emily's journey. Your likes and comments mean the world to us. We'd love to hear your thoughts and emotions about this remarkable story of courage and change. Should we continue with part 2, exploring what happens next in Emily's inspiring journey? Your engagement helps us create more meaningful content that makes a difference. Thank you for being part of this storytelling community.